Access control can be done effectively only when you do all these three different steps shown in the slide. First is authentication, the second is authorization, finally the last step is accounting. Authentication, authorization, and accounting, they're also called triple A's of access control because these are how access control is actually implemented in reality. We actually don't have one very initial and basic step missing in the slide, which is identification. So the whole process of access control begins with identification, where a supplicant or a subject claims that an identity belongs to him or her. So once there is a claimed identity, the process of verifying the claimed identity is called authentication. So the authentication process involves a supplicant and a verifier, because supplicant in this case will provide evidence for his or her claimed identity. A lot of times this type of evidence is called credentials, and the supplicant will provide the credentials to the verifier, and the verifier will use this evidence, i.e. credentials, to make sure the supplicant is really the person he or she claims to be. The next step is authorization, where you decide how many privileges this authenticated subject is going to have, because authentication doesn't necessarily mean that the authenticated person has all the rights in the world. So we still have to make a decision on how many privileges the person is supposed to have. So a lot of times the number of privileges is decided by a security policy, a predefined security policy. So in an ideal situation, you would only assign the privileges necessary for the subject to conduct its work, nothing more or nothing less. We also call this least privilege based on need to know, because the idea is the person only needs the privileges necessary to do his or her work. Finally, accounting means the process of monitoring the activities of the subject. Once the subject is authenticated and obtained a set of privileges, because it is possible that the subject could be abusing his or her rights. So it is an imperative for a security system to monitor what the subject is doing with his or her privileges, to prevent the privileges from being abused. As a way to monitor the activities of the subject, we typically use something called logging, where you're collecting logs of the activities of the subject, and when you have one or more logs collected for a particular subject, we call it an audit trail.